In the late 1990s, in a small secluded town in Ohio, there was an old bridge crossing Willow Creek. This bridge had been there for a very long time, built of stone and wood, and was rarely used after a new road was built nearby. However, Willow Creek Bridge was famous for a frightening rumor. It was haunted by the spirit of a woman in white. The legend says that many years ago, a young woman died tragically at this bridge. Some say she committed suicide after being betrayed by her lover. Others say she died in a car accident on a stormy night, and her body was swept away by the creek. Although the specific stories vary, they all agree that her spirit still lingers at the bridge, wearing an old white dress. Mark, whose name has been changed, a local teenager who liked to explore mysteries and scary things, had heard this story since he was a child. He was always fascinated by the legend of the woman in white on Willow Creek Bridge. One night, Mark, along with his two close friends, Lisa and Ben, whose names have been changed, decided to go to Willow Creek Bridge to verify the rumor. It was a bright moonlit night, but the air was still cold and silent. They drove along the dirt road leading to the bridge. As they got closer, the air became heavier. The trees on both sides of the road were like giant black shadows, reaching out in the darkness. When they reached the bridge, they stopped the car. The old bridge appeared under the moonlight, looking lonely and eerie. The creek flowed gently beneath, but a strange stillness enveloped the air. "Are you sure you want to do this, Mark?" Lisa asked, her voice slightly trembling, although she also liked mysteries. The atmosphere here made her feel uneasy. "Don't worry, Lisa," Ben said, trying to sound calm. "It's just a rumor. Ghosts aren't real." They got out of the car, walking onto the bridge. Their footsteps on the old wooden planks echoed in the night. As they reached the middle of the bridge, a sudden cold draft engulfed them, much stronger than the surrounding air. "It's so cold," Lisa said, shivering all over. Mark and Ben also felt cold. There was no wind. The cold draft seemed to come from nowhere. Then, Mark suddenly heard a very faint sound, like dripping water or weak crying, coming from below the bridge. "Do you guys hear anything?" Mark asked softly. Lisa and Ben also stopped, listening. They heard the sound, weak crying, sounding sad and full of pain. It seemed to come from somewhere beneath the bridge, near the water. They looked down under the bridge, trying to find the source of the sound, but it was too dark. They couldn't see anything clearly. They stood there for a while, listening to the mysterious crying. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. "I think we should go home," Ben said, his voice no longer calm. Mark also felt scared. The weak crying was very real, and the air here was too cold and eerie. They quickly returned to the car and drove away from Willow Creek Bridge. On the way back, no one said a word. They were all thinking about what they had experienced. The sudden cold draft, the weak crying under the bridge. Perhaps the rumor about the woman in white was true. There was something supernatural haunting Willow Creek Bridge. And they, curious teenagers, had perhaps unintentionally awakened it. Despite experiencing frightening things at Willow Creek Bridge, Mark's curiosity and desire to explore mysteries did not diminish. On the contrary, it increased. He believed he had truly touched something supernatural. Mark talked to Lisa and Ben about returning to the bridge. At first, they hesitated. The fear from the previous night still haunted them. However, Mark's persuasion and perhaps a bit of lingering curiosity made them agree. They decided to return to Willow Creek Bridge on another night. About a week later, this time, it was cloudy, obscuring the moonlight, making the atmosphere even gloomier. When they arrived at the bridge, the air was still unusually cold. The sound of the creek flowing was clearer in the silent night. They got out of the car, walked onto the bridge, feeling a sense of unease rising within them. They stood in the middle of the bridge, listening. There was no crying sound like the previous time, but the sound of the creek flowing sounded like some kind of whisper. Just then, Lisa suddenly let out a small gasp and pointed towards the distance. At the other end of the bridge. "Look," she said, her voice trembling. Mark and Ben looked in the direction Lisa was pointing. In the distance, where the bridge led into the woods, they saw a blurry figure. Pale white, the figure stood there, silent, not moving. Mark squinted, looking closer. The figure was very blurry, like a ghost, but it seemed to be the shape of a woman, wearing a long pale white dress. Ben took out his phone, trying to shine a light towards the figure. But the phone light was too weak in the darkness. They stood there, staring intently at the pale white figure, their hearts pounding in their chests. Fear enveloped them. The white figure slowly moved. It turned around, facing them, although the distance was quite far and the figure was blurry. Mark and Ben felt as if the figure's eyes were looking directly at them. And then, the figure slowly floated away, not walking, but gliding in the air, receding into the darkness of the woods, and disappearing. They stood there for a long time after the figure disappeared. An eerie silence enveloped the bridge. Did you guys see it too?" Lisa asked, her voice almost a whisper. Yes, Mark said, his voice also trembling. "That was the woman in white." Ben nodded, his face pale with fear. This time, there was no doubt. They had actually seen a ghost. The ghost of the woman in white on Willow Creek Bridge. This experience was much more terrifying than the previous time. It wasn't just sounds or coldness. It was a clear image, although blurry, of a supernatural entity. They quickly returned to the car and drove away from the bridge, filled with fear and horror. The blurry white figure on the bridge was the first sign that Willow Creek Bridge wasn't just about ghost stories. It was truly haunted, and they, the curious ones, had entered its world. After seeing the blurry white figure on Willow Creek Bridge, Mark, Lisa, and Ben were all living in fear. However, alongside the fear, Mark still felt a strange urge to learn more about the woman in white. He spent time delving deeper into the local legend. He talked to elderly residents in the town, listening to the stories they had heard from their parents and grandparents. He learned more details about the tragic story of the woman. Her name was said to be Sarah, whose name has been changed. She died on a stormy night on the bridge, perhaps in an accident. Some people said she was pregnant at the time. The story of Sarah's death made Mark feel sympathetic and sad. But that didn't explain why her spirit would haunt the bridge and cause frightening phenomena. Mark persuaded Lisa and Ben to return to Willow Creek Bridge again. This time, he wanted to try a different method. He wanted to try to communicate with Sarah's spirit. At first, Lisa and Ben flatly refused. Their fear was too great. However, after much persuasion, and perhaps a bit of unhealthy curiosity, they agreed, on the condition that they only stay for a short time and not go down under the bridge. They returned to Willow Creek Bridge on a night with a crescent moon. The air was still cold and gloomy. They got out of the car, walking onto the bridge. When they reached the middle of the bridge, Mark stopped. He took a deep breath and said softly, "Sarah? Are you here? We want to talk to you. We don't mean to disturb you." For a moment, nothing happened. Only the sound of the creek flowing and the wind blowing gently through the trees. But then, a sudden cold draft engulfed them. Stronger than ever before, the sound of the creek seemed to stop. The air became eerily silent. And then, right in front of them, only a few steps away, the blurry white figure appeared again. This time, the figure was a little clearer. They could see her old white dress more clearly, and her long black hair flowing down. The woman in white stood there, silent, looking directly at them. Her face was blurry, but Mark felt as if her eyes were looking deep into their souls. And then, the most terrifying thing happened. The blurry face of the woman in white slowly changed. Her mouth slowly opened, forming a wide, terrifying grin. That smile was not a joyful smile. It was a cold, emotionless smile, stretching all the way to her cheeks. Mark, Lisa, and Ben screamed in horror. That smile was too gruesome, too surreal. The cold smile seemed like a warning, a threat. After that, the woman in white slowly retreated, merging into the darkness of the night and disappearing. They stood there, trembling all over, unable to speak. That cold smile haunted their minds. That wasn't the smile of a sad spirit, Lisa said, her voice trembling. That was the smile of something evil. Mark and Ben agreed. The woman in white wasn't just a suffering spirit. There was something more terrifying hidden behind that smile. They quickly returned to the car and drove away from Willow Creek Bridge, never wanting to return to that place again. The cold smile of the woman in white was a warning from the darkness, that they had entered a place they shouldn't have entered, and it would forever haunt their dreams. After the terrifying encounter with the cold smile of the woman in white, Mark, Lisa, and Ben believed they had escaped the nightmare when they left Willow Creek Bridge. But they were wrong. The darkness from that bridge had followed them home. In the following days, they began to experience strange phenomena. Strange noises in their homes. Light footsteps on the stairs at night. Room doors automatically opening and then slamming shut. Objects being moved. They heard faint crying echoing in the air, similar to the crying they had heard under Willow Creek Bridge. The crying appeared at any time, anywhere, making them feel scared and uneasy. Sometimes, they felt a sudden cold draft engulf them, Even though the surrounding temperature was normal, the feeling of being watched always lingered. And then, more terrifying things began to happen. They saw the blurry white figure appearing in their homes, in corners of rooms, outside windows. The white figure would flit across their vision and then quickly disappear. One night, as Mark was sleeping, he suddenly felt a cold hand touch his face. He startled awake, but saw no one. However, the cold and eerie feeling was very real. Lisa also experienced similar things. She had horrifying nightmares about the woman in white with the cold smile. She woke up in fear, drenched in sweat. Ben often felt a gentle push from behind, or heard whispers right next to his ear when no one was around. They knew that the woman in white didn't just haunt the bridge. She had followed them home. She was tormenting them, as a punishment for daring to disturb her peace. Their fear grew stronger. They felt trapped, watched, and tormented by a supernatural force they could not see or touch. They tried to find an explanation. Was it because they had dared to try and communicate with Sarah's spirit? Had they done something wrong? They had gone to Willow Creek Bridge out of curiosity, wanting to experience something scary. And now, they were paying the price for that curiosity. The darkness from the old bridge had spread, enveloping their lives. The woman in white would not let them go. She was haunting every moment of their lives, making them live in fear and despair. They realized that dealing with a spirit was not a game. It was something much more dangerous and terrifying. And they didn't know if they could escape this haunting. The haunting by the woman in white became increasingly intense. She no longer tormented them silently. She appeared more clearly, and seemed to be getting closer. Mark, Lisa, and Ben frequently saw the white figure standing at the end of hallways in their homes, outside windows, or even right in their bedrooms when they woke up at night. The white figure was less blurry now. They could see her shape more clearly. Her wet white dress, her long black hair flowing down, and the most terrifying thing, the cold smile on her face also became clearer. That smile always haunted them, an expression of indifference and evil. She didn't speak, didn't make any sound except for the occasional faint crying. But her presence was enough to make them feel utter terror. One time, when Mark was alone in the living room in the evening, he suddenly saw the white figure standing right in front of him, only a few steps away. He froze, unable to move. That cold smile looked directly at him. Her eyes were empty, lifeless. Mark felt as if his soul was being frozen by that gaze. Then, the white figure slowly raised a hand, its long and gaunt finger pointing at Mark. He felt a sudden cold draft engulf him, and a sense of being threatened. "What do you want from us?" Mark asked softly, his voice trembling. There was no answer. The white figure just stood there, looking at him with the cold smile and empty eyes. After that, the white figure slowly retreated, merging into the darkness of the room and disappearing. These experiences left Mark, Lisa, and Ben in despair. They had tried to seek help from people experienced in supernatural phenomena, but no one could help them. Some people didn't believe their story. Others were scared by the level of evil they described. They felt isolated in their own fear. They couldn't escape the woman in white. She was always there, haunting them. They knew they had made a mistake by disturbing the peace of the bridge. And now, they were paying a heavy price for that curiosity. The cold smile of the woman in white was a constant reminder of her existence, of the relentless haunting. They didn't know when this haunting would end, or how it would end. They only knew that with each passing day, the white figure became clearer, and their fear grew stronger. Facing despair, they began to wonder how long they could survive before being swallowed by the darkness. The haunting by the woman in white reached its peak. She no longer just appeared more clearly, but also began to take more direct and terrifying actions. One night, as Mark, Lisa, and Ben were together at Mark's house, they suddenly heard insistent knocking on the front door. The knocking sounded strong and threatening. They looked at each other in fear. They knew it wasn't just someone knocking on the door. Then, the knocking stopped, and was replaced by fierce scratching on the door. The scratching sounded like long, sharp fingernails trying to scrape through the wood. They backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. Just then, they were horrified to see a blurry white figure appear behind the glass pane on the door. The white figure slowly pressed its face against the glass, and they could see the terrifying cold smile more clearly, staring at them with empty eyes. They screamed in horror. The white figure stood there for a moment, looking at them with the terrifying smile, then slowly retreated and disappeared. This experience made them realize that the woman in white didn't just want to scare them. She wanted to do something worse. She wanted to get into the house. They lived in constant fear, not daring to leave their homes, not daring to sleep alone. The darkness from the old bridge had swallowed their lives. They knew they couldn't live like this forever. They had to do something to end this nightmare. They researched the legend further, hoping to find a weakness of the woman in white, or a way to free her spirit. However, there was no reliable information. The legend only spoke of her tragic death and her haunting. One night, when the haunting by the woman in white became particularly intense, Mark, Lisa, and Ben made a desperate decision. They would return to Willow Creek Bridge, confront her, and try to ask her to leave them alone. They returned to the bridge at midnight, filled with fear but also determination. The bridge looked more terrifying than ever under the weak moonlight. They stood in the middle of the bridge and called out her name, Sarah. "Are you here? We want to talk to you." For a moment, nothing happened, but then, a sudden cold draft engulfed them, and the white figure appeared right in front of them. This time, the white figure was very clear. They could see every detail on her wet white dress, and the terrifying cold smile on her face. The woman in white looked directly at them, her empty eyes full of hatred. Mark took a deep breath and said, his voice trembling, "We are sorry for disturbing you. Please leave us alone. Please find peace for your soul." The cold smile on her face didn't change. But then, from her mouth came a faint sound, like a whisper, but also full of anger and pain. "They cannot leave," the whisper echoed, as if coming from the bridge itself. Then, the white figure suddenly lunged towards them. Mark, Lisa, and Ben screamed in horror and scrambled off the bridge, running frantically towards the car. They didn't dare to look back. They only heard the wind whistling past their ears and their hearts pounding in their chests. They drove away from Willow Creek Bridge, leaving the horror behind. However, the haunting memory of the woman in white remained, persistent and terrifying. She no longer tormented them as intensely as before, but occasionally, they still felt a sudden cold draft, heard faint crying from the distance, or saw the blurry white figure appear for a brief moment. They knew they would never escape the curse from the old bridge. The woman in white would forever be a part of their lives. A reminder of unhealthy curiosity and its terrible price. Willow Creek Bridge still stands there, lonely and eerie, and the legend of the woman in white is still recounted. A warning to those who dare to go near that place at night. The darkness from the old bridge and the cold smile of the woman in white forever haunt those who have faced her. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, or stories based on true legends, like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.